Hello and welcome to Cinema Spotlight with Jake and Reuben. I'm Jake,
I'm Reuben.
and this week we're joined by very special guest, Alex.
Hello, I'm Alex Figueiredo. I am a Brazilian actor based in London. I'm also a filmmaker, and I'm very excited to be here.
Now, this week we have a very exciting roster of films to review, starting with The Monkey, the new film by Osgood Perkins. He's coming hot on the heels of Longlegs, and this time he's adapting a Stephen King short story of the same name. And it stars Theo James in not one, but two performances.
Next, we'll be talking about I'm Still Here, the Best Picture nominee directed by Walter Salles and starring Fernanda Torres in a powerhouse performance.
And next up, we'll talk about Sean Baker's Anora, starring Mikey Madison, who just won a BAFTA, and the film is a very strong contender as Best Picture winner at the Oscars.
And please do make sure that you're following us over on YouTube and Spotify, as we'd hate for you to miss a single moment of Cinema Spotlight. Like, subscribe, share, and comment. Tell us everything that we've got wrong. We're looking forward to hearing from you.
And a call out to all up and coming filmmakers out there. We'd love to watch your stuff and interview you. So email us at cinemaspotlightjakeandreuben@gmail.com.
Now, first up this week, we are talking about The Monkey, which is the new film by Osgood Perkins. It's a comedy horror, but it's very splashy, and it is based on Stephen King's short story of the same name, although I think it's been fairly liberal in its adaptation. It stars Theo James as twins, and it also features a starry cast including Adam Scott and Tatiana Maslany, and watch out for Elijah Wood in there too. Now, it starts with two twins as young boys discovering their father's old toy monkey, which they wind up, they let it loose, and then bad things start to happen. And this is a film that kind of spans the ages. We see these characters kind of grow up into characters both played by Theo James. And it's a very kind of interesting rumination via the medium of gore on the kind of idea that everybody dies, death is inevitable, and isn't that kind of funny? Now, I sort of feel a bit conflicted about this film, so Jake, I'd love to know, what did you make of The Monkey?
I went to see it last week, I think, and I was in a situation where the crowd seemed very unaware of what film they were going to see. They were very much expecting this very dark Final Destination-esque film, which Final Destination has its funny bits, but is mostly about the deaths and the scares, and people would consider that a proper horror franchise. I wouldn't. It's terrible. Don't watch that. There's a new one coming out, which I think we'll have to watch. Proper slander there. But The Monkey is hilarious. If you get on with the type of comedy it is bleak, it is dark, and it is gory. It is very aggressively gory. This film was a riot for me. I absolutely adored it. It was my type of weird. Because I understood. I watched the trailer and I was like, this is going to be absolutely stupidly ridiculous. And I was already understood that when I went in. And so therefore, I sat and I really just let it wash over me. I loved it. I just thought every performance was chewing a different portion of the scenery, and I thought, wow, this is the kind of film I want to see, because it's fun. You can really engage in the actual humor of it, in the darkness. The horror movies have become so very severe, austere, and I like that too, because I think they are one of the most defining and innovative forms of cinema. Yet this was just an alright comedic masterpiece of madness. You can tell it's from a Stephen King short story because it's a very neat idea that then is built upon, and it has quite a ridiculous storyline, a ridiculous twists and turns, and all the characters. Theo James actually is very solid. He plays twins. I liked watching him, and I like watching the younger actor who played the twins as a boy. I truly would highly recommend this to any horror fans and sort of dark comedy fans. I really would. I thought it's just insane. And I was so happy, because this is made for me. It's my sort of cup of tea. I love this kind of thing. I love slightly wacky, really well made. I can't deny it. Really well made, score good, the way it's shot, wonderful. Alex, what did you think about this film?
The first thing that I loved was the comedy. Like I didn't see it coming. I had no idea what the film was about. I think I'd heard recently that it was a horror. That's all I knew. but I think the comedy was brilliant. I started to look forward to all the deaths because they were so creative. It's just everything else didn't do it for me. I feel like there were so many storylines. As simple as the story was, we at the same time had all these tiny little things that I couldn't really keep up with. And I think the main thing for me is that I didn't believe, or I wasn't interested or invested in the characters. I think that's what my thing was. I didn't really care about Theo James. I didn't believe his twin. I didn't really know who the enemy was or what. The conflict is quite obvious. And I really liked the whole storyline around the monkey. I thought it was quite simple and funny, and I don't really need more of an explanation on why it happens, on why they're cursed. But I just feel like I didn't really care for them. And I think it's because it wasn't very believable, because his twin brother is made as this psychopath. We don't really know why he's that way. He just is. He simply hates him. I get that it's the tone of the film. I get that it's a comedy, but I just couldn't believe any of it. And then I felt very little for the characters. I wasn't really worried about them. I think the one thing I liked is just the whole comedy of it. I was laughing every time, there was a crazy death and things like that. I think that really got me, and I think it was brilliantly made. The thing with Theo James is I think he's spectacular as well. He's a wonderful actor. I didn't love him in this, and I think it was because of the writing. I think as an actor, it was the perfect case of, I don't think there's anything he could have done different, but you're only as good as your writing goes. And I think oftentimes he wasn't so supported by all the other elements, especially his, when he plays the evil twin and stuff like that. I didn't fully believe his motivations or why he hated his brother so much. And then that's kind of explained. Yeah, there's the whole thing with She-Hulk and, the mom and all of that. What are you thinking?
It's interesting because I actually really agree with what you're saying, because the comedy of it is, I think, simultaneously its fatal flaw. Because I completely agree, the comedy deaths are fun. I actually think in some situations they could have been pushed more. There are a couple of really, really inventive kills. One involving a swimming pool, I think, is a real highlight. And there's another very, very kind of extended one involving sort of multiple horrendous injuries. But I think that at a point, the film starts to want you to simultaneously take it seriously and care about the characters and have a big emotional payoff, and still kind of keep running the same goofy humour that it's been having the whole film. And I found that it was a bit tonally unbalanced. I think in part that's because the Stephen King short story, that's completely serious. That's not really a comedy, although Stephen King always has a kind of a dark streak of humour in his work. But then when you have something like this being adapted, I think first of all it was going to be Frank Darabont. It was going to be completely straight. It was going to be really, really deadly serious. And then eventually we had Oz Perkins coming along and adding his little special sauce. I think he said in an interview with Empire that when he read the script and it was completely straight, he was like, well, I'm going to take some real liberties here and just do my own thing. And that is simultaneously what makes it good, what makes it unique. It has a really brilliant creative voice. But to a certain extent, I think it undermines itself at times through the tone of the comedy, especially because, as I say, there were moments where I thought, well, come on, I think that death could have been more horrible. There's one involving bees, which is in the trailer, so I'm not afraid to mention it. There's one involving bees, which I sort of thought was a bit disappointing, honestly. It's a very promising murder, but I didn't really feel it. Overall, when we get to this kind of point of, okay, now we're going to have a big emotional kind of family-centric climax, where I think it really does want to talk about family and grief and loss and horrible and funny madness of the fact that everybody at some point has to die and we have no idea how. I just didn't necessarily feel like it was the same film I'd been watching. It didn't necessarily feel earned. So, I enjoyed it. It is also, like you, Jake, it's my sense of humour. I started absolutely chuckling away from the off. But I just felt that if it wants to have a little bit more substance towards the end, it maybe needs to work slightly harder, because I didn't really feel, like you, Alex, I didn't really feel any emotional connection with these characters in the way that I think they're expecting. I do want to say, I do think it's a good film, and I crucially think that the central conceit is absolutely brilliant, and the design of the monkey is absolutely inspired. They've done an amazing job of making something that simultaneously genuinely looks like a toy that you could find in a charity shop and take home for £5, but also something that actually, with the right lighting, looks like a creature from hell.
It looks like an age-old iconography. It's always existed, and that's kind of the idea of this creature. It sort of feels like it's always been there, and it is based on classic wind-up dolls, the wind-up circus monkey. It's taking something that exists and then subverting it, because they did actually change the way. Originally it's that they smack the cymbals, but actually that is under copyright by Disney for some reason.
That's why I wondered why it wasn't cymbals, because I'm not going to lie, I think cymbals are scarier.
Cymbals are scary. I guess you can crush someone's head, but drumsticks, I mean, if you've met a mad drummer, you know, they're quite scary. I think the design of the film is great, and the world exists outside of a normal reality, and that's why I think you're both wrong. I must say some fighting words here, because you're saying that it's trying to earn an emotional moment, whereas I don't think it is at all. I think it understands that it's trying to parodize. It's a parody of these big emotional moments, because those emotional moments, and I won't spoil the film, are so snappy and so quick and then diffused. I won't spoil what you mean, but you two who've seen the film understand what I'm on about. It's diffused so quickly that I think, with a sort of wry smile from the director as well, and I'm like, yeah, absolutely. It feels to me personally, just I can understand your gripes, but I think that actually it's really not trying to, because the relationships are so bizarre. Even with the good relationships, the relationship between the mother and the boys is kind of off kilter. Well, these relationships don't seem very human at all. Elijah Wood characters, beyond a parody of the great stepdad. But I'm just like, I don't think it was trying to be genuine at all. I could say that some of the kills should have been pushed further, because the ones that are really graphic are the best, are absolutely the best.
I have to say, I think it peaks, unfortunately, in its opening scene, which is a sort of a cameo by Adam Scott. There is a murder in that scene, which I was like, oh, okay, like, now I know what we're in for. But I did feel like it never quite lived up to the momentum that murder set off.
You know, with all those sort of things, you kind of need a bit more variation. And I like that it wasn't just trying to up itself, because it really couldn't. It had its set pieces, then it just had a sort of string of chaos. And I think a lot of the editing is quite hilarious as well. It's edited very like a comedy, and a very effective one at that. And I believe that, you know, it is a full-on parody of elevated horror, with this sort of very sinister, beautifully shot classic monkey, but then also with all the comedy, and even just the twins angle at all seems ridiculous, something out of The Parent Trap in the 90s, you know. Someone will really enjoy it if they can understand that they shouldn't take any of it seriously. If they can even see some of the emotional moments as tongue-in-cheek, which I did, I think you can go away loving this film. But I can understand your two's reservations, to be honest.
I think that's a bit exhausting, to be honest. If it's all as snarky and tongue-in-cheek as you're saying, I think that's a bit exhausting, you know. And I think that there was an element to it where I started thinking, gosh, you know, it's just like I sort of know exactly what's happening. It felt a little bit formulaic at times, or we're just sort of waiting for the next kill. I don't know. To be kind to the film, to credit the film, I think I have to interpret it as being slightly more sincere in those moments than you do. Because otherwise, I just think that's a bit of a tired joke, you know, because the whole film is satirical. The whole film is, as you say, definitely a parody. And it's completely a piece of pulp fiction, fundamentally, in a way that I do really enjoy. But I think that it does have, in my opinion, a kind of emotional root to it. And, I think those kind of closing scenes, which I'm obviously not going to spoil here, but I think that the closing scenes really dial into that. You know, it is funny, it is comedy, but it does want to say deep things. It wants to talk about what it means to be a person, what it means to deal with loss. You know, Osgood Perkins' parents both died in very tragic and sad ways. And he's talked about, you know, kind of finding the humour in the absolute nightmare of the reality of being a person, and knowing that at some point you're going to die, and it might be really, really nasty, you know. So I think that he is trying to have a serious conversation there, and I sort of wish it leaned into that tone a tiny bit more, really, in the climax. You know, I have no problem with the rest of it, but it didn't quite ring true for me, which was a shame, because I completely adored Longlegs, and there were sequences in this which I think are unbelievably great. I mean, I have to say, there is a recurring visual gag of just cutting to a photograph of a deceased family member.
The parts that got me the most were the deaths and all that. My issue is, if you take away those scenes and all you have is kind of the characters and their conflicts, then I feel like I'm not invested at all. So I feel like the one thing that's keeping me hooked is all these deaths and how creative they are. But then if that's what I'm in for, then I might as well watch I don't know, a Jackass film. It almost felt like pranks. It felt really entertaining. But then I feel like they could have been more supported if I cared for the people. Do you know what I mean? And I don't think it should be like, you know, Sophie's Choice, like a, you know, high emotional. And I'm not saying I don't want to be that invested emotionally. I get it. It's a comedy. We're in for it. It's a treat. It's not something I'll, you know, grieve later as a viewer, but just something that says, oh, I want him to stay. I want them to make peace. I'm rooting for this character. I didn't care about them. I think that was the thing. And in comedy, you can still care, you know, even though it's silly. Like you're not going to cry when your favorite character dies, but you're like, damn it. I just wish I'd felt more.
I do very much agree with you. I think it's good. I think it's definitely worth people going and watching it. I had a good time. I just felt a little bit frustrated because I felt like it really could have been a great time.
Yes, it's nowhere near on the same level as Longlegs in its sort of impact or just sort of how effective its type of storytelling is, but it was a riot. Next, we'll be talking about Walter Sallis's much-lauded film I'm Still Here, starring Fernanda Torres in a absolutely whirlwind powerhouse performance that recently just won the Golden Globe. The film takes place during the military dictatorship in Brazil and follows the Paiva family as their patriarch Rubens is taken for questioning and never returns. We follow along as the mother of the family, Eunice Paiva, struggles with her own children, looking after them, and also struggling to try and get the truth about her husband's disappearance. Now, this film was quite a shock to me as it sort of appeared from nowhere. After the Golden Globe win from Fernanda Torres, it suddenly sparked a huge interest in people in this country especially. When I went to see it in the cinema, it was absolutely packed. And I thought, quite rightly so. But I'm going to pass off to you, Alex, to talk more in depth about it. And I want to know all your feelings, how you felt watching the movie, how, as you know, Brazilian yourself, how you thought about how it represented everything.
Man, I think just like you, I didn't see it coming. Obviously, I was born and raised in Brazil. I'm not too up to date with everything that's going on in there, like film wise, and I didn't think it would be this big of a deal. Like I was already supporting the film before I watched it just because I was so happy to see one of our films do so well outside, but I didn't see it coming basically. I really loved it. I really loved it because it feels like it's the right time for a film like this to come out. It's been in the making, I think, for 7 years it took them to film that. And I think little did they know that it would really match by the time it came out, that it'd be so important where we are now. I think what I loved it most was Fernanda Torres, because I think as an actress, it was so beautiful to see. And it's a rare thing and it's tempting to go the complete opposite way of that as an actor. That's what really shook me, is that she's always fighting her emotions. I think that's what really got me. That's what really convinced me, is that every scene she's fighting to internalize it. She's being as resilient as she can. She's being a soldier and she's always keeping it together for the family. And she never really allows herself to fully express her emotions, her fears, and things like that. And I think as an actor, when you're given a role like that, I think you would ideally want to show what you're feeling. You'd want to show the struggles. You would want to show everything. And I feel like that was such a brave, bold choice. I know she was directed that way as well, but just the fact that she's always keeping it in just allows us to feel more for her. I feel like that is such a powerful choice. I think that's why we're so captivated with her, because she's keeping it together the whole time. We've chatted before. You guys know I'm a fan of simplicity. The film was so simple. I was afraid it would be kind of too political for me, like, you know, a lot of names and what happened, and if you don't really know the history of Brazil, are you going to keep up with it? Like dictatorship in Brazil, what do you have to know beforehand, kind of thing. And it really wasn't. You just follow this happy family lose their father and then their world kind of just crumbles down. It's that simple. And for some reason you go on this journey with them. It's not like a single heartbreak. I think you're slowly coming to the realization that the father is not coming back. as Eunice Paiva does. And it's just so heartbreaking. I had like silent tears just coming down the whole time. I don't know how you guys felt. I just felt like the cinema was so, you could hear a pin drop. I feel like the silent moments were so powerful. Like the ice cream scene and everything was so gut punching. I can't really think of anything negative. It's been a while since I've watched a film like that. I'd like to think that it's not just because I'm Brazilian. Obviously, there's, like I've learned about the dictatorship, the shots and everything really spoke to me. The beaches and, Christmas is summer for us, that kind of stuff really spoke to me on a personal level. I'd like to think that I would be just as moved if it was a French film or whatever. Yeah. Obviously, maybe not to the same extent, but I was just really genuinely moved. And as a Brazilian, I'd love to see that an international film is doing so well and that Fernanda is getting such a big recognition. Her mother, I'm sure a lot of you guys know this, did a film 26 years ago with the same director called Central Station, and she got an Oscar nomination for that. And just a fun fact, like in Brazil, she didn't win that year, right? But we can't believe that happened. We're saying now in Brazil that it's like a World Cup scenario where, because World Cup in Brazil means the world to us. The whole country's painted like green and yellow. Everyone goes out in the streets. You miss work, to watch the games and things like that. And that's how Brazil is right now with Fernanda. It's kind of scary because if she loses, I don't know what is going to happen to the internet, because everyone's betting their houses like, she has to win this Oscar. And I was kind of feeling the same way, like super anxious. Like, I don't know why I felt this anxiety, like my life depended on it. Like, oh God, I loved her. I loved the film so much. Like, she has to take it home. She has to do it for our people kind of thing. Obviously, I know it's really hard because I think we're at a disadvantage when it comes to the Oscars and things like that because it's an international film. I feel like the film only got attention now. We didn't have that time to really sell it, whereas the substance has kind of been around for a while. It had a bigger marketing and things like that. We shall see what happens. I don't know why us Brazilians, we have this sense of like, come on, we need to take this one home. I think it's to do her mother justice 26 years ago. But yeah, that's a little, that's where we're at. If you want a little Brazilian taste from our end, that's kind of where we're at, just kind of fully rooting for her.
It's so interesting to hear it from your point of view. I mean, I have to say, off the bat, I wasn't very familiar with this historical time period, I'm embarrassed to say. And I didn't know the story of Rubens Paiva and his family. And so I found this really, really engrossing and really shocking and really, really moving. You talked about, the pin drop silence in the cinema and silent tears. I mean, I was very much in the same boat. I was colossally moved by this. I thought it was a really, really powerful piece of work because it actually talks about so many things. As you say, it talks about motherhood, and it talks about motherhood brilliantly. It talks about political awakening. It talks about ambition in later life, and it talks about the way that we all essentially kind of come together at some point later in our lives and are able to see things more clearly than perhaps we can in the moment. And that very sort of slow drip of grief as you realise, okay, their dad isn't coming back, is really brilliantly done because you feel so connected to the characters because you're realising that fact along with them. I mean, I guess if you know the story, then perhaps you won't have that experience, but I didn't, and so I was really upset at times by this. But I also found the central performance utterly compelling. I think she's unbelievably brilliant, Fernanda Torres. I wish it wasn't such a tight race at the Oscars because I think she's probably my second favourite because I think I'm too much of a substance stan. But I think she's amazing. I think she's absolutely amazing. She does so much with the quiver of a lip. You can tell exactly what she is thinking all the time. And you're absolutely right, Alex, that so much of it is internalised. She doesn't want other people to worry. She doesn't want her children to be scared. And you see the toll as well that has on her. So I found myself kind of inspired by this film because it's really important. I think some people could write it off as being worthy because, it does have a very political angle. But I thought it was such brave filmmaking and such important filmmaking because it talks about the importance of having courage and being brave and standing up to adversity and standing up for what's right. And I think that perhaps this is particularly on the mind because we have Donald Trump in the White House. We have a man declaring himself king on his personal X account. I think that we are currently seeing a rising tide where political chaos in America and around the world seems more possible. This film makes you realise that this can happen anywhere. This isn't something that just happened in Brazil. This is a story that actually has happened many, many times in many places over human history and will continue to do so. So honestly, I thought it was really impressive, shocking, upsetting, but so moving, so beautiful. The family scenes are just completely gorgeous. You believe 100% that these people live together and love each other. They're such a tight-knit group, and I felt like one of them. I was so emotionally connected to each and every member of this family. I'm really keeping my fingers crossed for this at the Oscars. I'd be delighted if it won in any of its 3 categories.
Well, I think this film is spectacular. As Alex said, he couldn't really find anything to fault about the film, and to be honest, neither can I, in the regards that the performances are all solid, especially the kids. All the kids in this, we focus so solidly on the very beginnings of this terrible ordeal that the Piver family go through, and all the kids, and they're very young actors as well, do an excellent job of just selling the severity of it. What this film does expertly well is because we have seen many films where people are under severe occupation, under dictatorships. A lot of very effective and wonderful films like The Pianist, Schindler's List, and Death of Stalin even as a good example of where you see the ordeal that they're under even through different lenses, drama and comedy. This film does something very different, which I thought was very effective, is that you actually see the family living a happy life on beautiful sunsets, this golden film look, it's very warm, it's very beautiful. The Super 8 itself, it has this very warming, nostalgic quality, even though obviously I didn't grow up in Brazil, but it has a nostalgic feel to the life of when you were that young with your parents and just having an eternal summer. But the effective thing is, when dealing with this topic of the control of right-wing or dictatorships, is that they're always bubbling under the surface. We do get a very early on scene where people are just driving in a car smoking weed, then a whole blockade shows up, and then you're pulled over and you see the deal of the military dictatorship, but then they sort of hush for a while until the real inciting incident shows up. And that really is just, it shows that people need to be careful, because people can be so swept up in the idea of, oh no, everything's fine, it doesn't matter. Yes, there's undercurrents of political tension, but it can happen to anyone. That the people who think that they have power and control, and people who believe that they are better than others, can just strip away people's lives without care and just deny and lie. And I think it was so effective at doing that, because you've got this beautiful family, rich, wealthy family, live in this beautiful house by the sea, lots of friends, eating food, all these wonderful scenes that you get of a wonderful, happy family life completely upended all of a sudden, and people going through torture, and also emotional torture through decades. And I thought, wow, what an effective film, and what a necessary film for right now, where right-wing values have become seemingly popular again for whatever reason. We need films like this to really upend the belief that it'll make things safer, because it never does. But more on a filmmaking point of view, I just thought that it was so neatly done, and it's quite a long film. It does traverse several different periods, but it's very effective. It has a quite haunting end, haunting throughout, but it also has a lot of hope, which is what I really like, and what you sometimes lack in modern films so much, because it is quite a dour political spectrum across the world. It was a truly fabulous performance, and by the central character. Fernanda Torres was just absolutely, I've never seen her in anything before, never heard of her before, to my own shame, but I was just so locked in. I could have watched that performance for way, way longer. It's so close, the race at the Oscars, that it is almost unfair, where it's sort of the winners of other categories are becoming very underlined and very common, whereas this one, it's a toss-up. Mikey Madison won the BAFTA, and Demi Moore is very hot on the tails too, and so we have to think, well, I really would hope that she wins the Oscar. But it is so perfect, because it shows that motherhood, it's a beautiful demonstration of that. It's a great historical artifact. It does very accurately represent the characters from the past. The recreations are very fluid, but it doesn't feel forced, like so often in biopics that we watch. Most notably the one we watched recently in Complete Unknown, where they labour to recreate iconic moments.
Don't remind me, Jake.
This film recreates moments so effortlessly. You know, you see the photographs and the recreations of it. I knew it was a true story, but halfway through I was like, no, this is just fabricated, inspired by true stories. But no, it's so pinpoint accurate to how they represent it. And, you know, it's a real testament to the director and the production team. It was just perfect, like genuinely perfect. It's a very heavy watch, so you have to be in a certain mood to watch it, but so necessary right now. I think you have to watch it, pass it on to your friends, and make them watch it too. I really can't say much more about it, apart from, well, practical perfection in a film like this, really.
I agree, man. In a way, I'd like to think that that's a win in itself, you know, when it comes to all these ceremonies and things like that. I think I'm just thinking she already won kind of thing, like everything she's achieved and how well the film is doing and how it's touching everyone's hearts kind of thing. I think that's a win in itself. It's just that cherry on top, you know what I mean? Like, oh, come on, let her take home the Oscar kind of thing.
Well, I hope it wins over Emilia Perez. I hope it wins.
Oh man, me too. It deserves it as well. I'm like, come on, it's not because it's personal. It is personal, but it's not in this case. I genuinely, it's the same thing with Demi Moore. I loved her in that. I like the substance, but I'm like, I would go with Fernanda regardless. Let's see. Our next film is called Anora by Sean Baker, and it talks about a Brooklyn stripper who begins a relationship with the son of a very wealthy Russian oligarch. I personally really like the film. I'm very curious to see what you guys think.
Yeah, so I think the first thing to say is that obviously this is actually a re-release. Anora did come out a few months ago, but now because it's up for a bunch of awards, it's having a big sort of second cinematic release. So if you did miss it the first time around, listen, go and see it. Make sure you've seen all of those 10 Best Picture nominees. Now, I have to say, I really, really rated this. I like Sean Baker. I think he's a really interesting director. I think my favourite film of his thus far is Tangerine, which I think is just fab, but we'll talk about that another time. And this I thought was really, really fabulous. This film wasn't what I expected it to be. So Mikey Madison plays the titular character. She goes by Annie, and she works as a stripper, she works as an escort. And when she falls in with Ivan, who is, as you mentioned, Alex, the son of a very wealthy Russian oligarch, it seems like she is living the dream. Suddenly, she has access to wealth beyond her wildest imagination. She has a kind of burgeoning relationship, which is fun. You know, Ivan is nice. You know, I think he's exactly what she needs in that he's very easy. He's very easy breezy. She doesn't need to work hard with him. And indeed, from the moment that we meet her, Anora is in control. You know, she's expert at her job. You know, we see her at the beginning being wildly popular with customers, and all the way through the film, like, she is this very commanding presence. She's very sure of herself. She's very strong. And all of that gets challenged when Ivan's parents hear that Anora and Ivan have secretly gotten married. And suddenly, kind of all hell breaks loose. And for me, I thought that as far as awards go, we've been talking about it in respect to I'm Still Here. Mikey Madison, I think, has got this attention because of how her character then is put under this sort of intense pressure, this intense stress. There are incredible sequences which are very comedic as well as being quite genuinely disturbing at times, you know, where she is then basically being bullied and manipulated and essentially abducted by people who work for this sinister oligarch. I thought that she manages to actually do so much with this character who, while being really, really strong on the outside, you know, you get to see her inner vulnerability, you get to understand her personality, all without, you know, the shell necessarily breaking. I think Sean Baker is such a good director. He famously takes a kind of very research-led approach to his films. And so it's a really, really good film, is basically the upshot of it. I think it's really excellent. It's funny, it's gripping, it's moving, it's really, really well made. I think that there's fantastic use of colour all the way throughout. It's kind of studded with this sort of deep red that at times, you know, you're like, oh, you know, it's sort of evoking passion, it's evoking lust. At other times, it's evoking vulnerability. I just think it's phenomenally well made. And I think it's so nice to see Sean Baker who I think, has always been very celebrated, but perhaps I think is maybe a little underappreciated. Really get something so mainstream with this one. So yeah, I really liked it. I have one big quibble that I'd like to throw to you guys. How did you feel about the use of Take That tonight? I don't know what it's called. Today This Could Be.
Firstly, I'll say I loved the film. Absolutely loved it in every aspect, because it feels like two films stitched together, but neatly stitched together. A sort of fantasy film and then a reality film. Greatest Day. I actually adored the use of the song because I thought, well, a lot of the film takes place over one long extended day. There's a lot of montage throughout the sort of first half of the film, and then the second half, as I said, it clearly is quite distinct where the separation comes. That takes place over a very long extended day and night, so a full 24 hours practically. And the song therefore has this tongue-in-cheek humor to it, that today this could be the greatest day of our lives. And it's that typical sense you use something which is usually used for great jubilation, but display it over scenes of stripping, and then also scenes of youth, marriage, and in a term, stupidity and recklessness, I see. And it's sort of the dance remix of this song. I think it's used quite effectively, because as Brits, we hear Take That, and we're like, oh, that's an interesting use.
I wondered if it was slightly, deliberately naff, because with all the love to Take That, I think it is definitely a song that we think of as being, it's a bit naff, particularly in the year 2025. And I wondered if, it was kind of being used to sort of undermine the glamour of sometimes what we're seeing, because I think the film does a good job of kind of juxtaposing the glamour and the grit and the grime.
I agree. I think it is supposed to have this saccharine sweet, because the first half of the film is saccharine sweet when the two characters are falling for each other in a term. I think what this film really solidifies for, because I actually was enjoying that quite fantasy bit. It's quite nice. Young love is quite fun to watch. It's Romeo and Juliet, quite engaging, and the two actors were brilliant. You could see why they would so rapidly fall in love with each other, like an avalanche, a snowballing effect. But the real kicker, when this film became not only good but excellent to me, is when that second half kicks in, when chaos ensues, when hijinks ensue. It becomes so much more than it was. You really see Mikey Madison deservedly winning the BAFTA, in my opinion, for such a nuanced, fabulous performance for someone so young. I think that what really works in this film is the comedy, and what really works is just how daring it is. It really is quite a daring film. It is hilarious. It was almost like the bumbling Home Alone characters were the big villainous henchmen who sort of show up, but it had a beauty, a sweetness to some of the performances as well, which really shows throughout the film. But it is absolutely stone cold hilarious. It's just so absurd. But then when Mikey Madison is such a good performer that she is able to rein that back in when it needs to be. Because it's been around a while and this is a re-release, I knew it had some of these twists and turns. So I was sort of expecting it to show up, but I never expected it to be so good.
What I was going to say is I really liked Anora. I love Sean Banker. I was just really hooked. I think everyone's just amazing in it. I love the young Russian actor. It looks so natural. It looks like they're just being themselves. And the ironic thing is, I don't think they are. It looks like Sean Baker found an actor who just happens to be that way, who would happen to react that way. Maybe someone who works as a sex worker who's so comfortable. And it's quite shocking to realize that they're not. And that just means they did a brilliant job. You just believe it. My thing with Anora that got me hooked is the whole time, I don't know why I was thinking of stakes. Like, what's in it for them? That's the only thing that was in my mind. It's not necessarily a criticism or a bad thing, but I was just thinking, if it all goes bad for Anora, I don't feel that bad for her. The stakes aren't that big. That was the only thing I was thinking. And then it's only in the end that we realize that I think for Anora, it's more of an emotional thing. The whole time it feels like, okay, the stakes is she wants to, sponge as much as she can from the marriage, from the situation. So she leaves that scenario with a fun experience and the money that she deserves as a wife. There's more than that to it. And maybe if that was planted a bit earlier, I would have been more hooked. Like, oh, there's more at stake. Maybe it would have hooked me in a different way earlier on if I saw it coming somehow.
I think that's absolutely right. I think that the way I understood it was about a performance. Her performance is showing us that actually the character of Anora, the character of Annie, is actually a front. it's actually rare in the film that I think we get a glimpse into her true self, because she's constantly presenting a version of herself, be that to attract clients, be that to protect herself in situations where she's being threatened. Even I think in sequences, I think that we are seeing her in survival mode, and what she does best is fake it. And actually, I think this kind of ties into the relationship and specifically the sexual relationships that we see in the film. You know, this isn't a film in which kind of her pleasure is at any point prioritized or particularly represented. And so actually, for me, I think that final scene in which you see everything crack open, that I think is the curtains falling away. You know, we're able to actually understand who she is. Her soul is actually bared in that sequence. And I think that because it is all the way through the film the case that she is kind of putting up a facade, when you see that kind of crumble down and you see, oh, okay, wow, she is this really strong character, but she has these kind of inner vulnerabilities. That to me made sense, and it made me kind of appreciate, okay, yeah, this person is doing a performance all the time.
Well, I thought that actually there were a few more gaps and cracks that you saw earlier in the film, and I think that's what really connected me to the character so much, is that actually when the inciting incident happens and they do decide to get married, you know, that's not something, I mean, you could say that she wants the mass financial gain, but it's more, I guess, that someone actually looks at her in a far fresher set of eyes. You know, she's got these dead-eyed men that she's stripping for every night, or in her escort business who she has to deal with there. But Vanya, or Ivan, he's so vibrant, full of energy. You can see how she could also be suckered in by his energy, and why she might actually crack a bit and actually let go her professionalism to a way to actually get married and let go of her job. You know, a very steady income for her, you know, not glamorous, not as glamorous as the billion-dollar mansion that they live in, but, you know, there's the elements that she does want that comfort when she's laying on him when she's playing video games, and she looks very sad because she wants more of comfort from him, because that's what she wants to connect with. She's a human being after all, and that's what really sells it for me. And yes, she does crack at the end, but I think that, you know, the film is such a great demonstration of how people with boundless wealth can just destroy lives carelessly and recklessly. It's about recklessness on the side of abusing people who are not in the position, you know, the people who do not have the financial ability to do the same things. And, you know, it's almost like, you know, she's thrown away and she's had to deal with this her whole life as a sex worker and as a stripper. She really has to face that. And when she finally opens up a little bit to this young and sort of vibrant, burning candle burnt on every single end, that is the young Ivan, when he just throws her away, or seemingly throws her away, it's even more devastating. That's why she's so adamant to try and get it back. Maybe it's just because she's a great performer. Maybe I'm suckered in. But I think it's genuinely because she thought that, oh, this is my chance to have more than just, you know, better money, of course, but also a better life with someone who just sees me beyond just the sex object. But then later on you realize that, you know, the real devastation, the real drama of this highly comedic film, the real drama comes from the fact that she is seen as worthless again by someone she thought that she might be able to trust, and then is cracked wide open. I think, wow, what a fantastic performance, because it has those little breadcrumbs, and I really saw it. I know that you guys might have felt a little more disconnected, but I really connected with the character, because you do have a look. You don't just see her at the strip club. You don't just see her performing her escorting duty. You do see her at home when she's completely vulnerable, only briefly, but I think it's so necessary. There's a choice that's been made to show her there, because we can see what she looks like when she's away from the performance, and that you can relate to some of her moments when she's with Vanya.
Jake, you kind of convinced me there. I think it's just because these moments of vulnerability and her seeking connection are so subtle that the premise of the film seems to be more about her trying to make this deal work. And I think the treasure in the film is her seeking connection, is her real goal, that in the end she kind of is again tossed to the side. That might be overlooked, I'm thinking, by some audiences, you know, but I think maybe that's the beauty of it as well, that it's something subtle that one would think as an audience, oh, her objective here, like, what does she want? She wants to make the most of this marriage. She wants to leave with a lot of money, and maybe that's not what she's actually in for.
It's so interesting that the film does have that ambiguity, like it isn't set in stone. But I think that's because, like life, there are blurry edges and you never quite know what people are thinking. I like the fact that it doesn't kind of have such clean-cut lines and that it is kind of open to that interpretation. I agree with you, Jake. I didn't mean to suggest that I think that she's performing a character and we see nothing of her until the end. And I think it's been very interesting to see the response as well from sex workers. I've read a number of responses that have responded very positively to it, in feeling that, you know, it's much more of a kind of matter-of-fact look at sex work. This is not a film that's interested in any judgments either way, and it's not a film that's actually interested in kind of making a spectacle out of it. So I think that speaks to that kind of almost documentarian aesthetic that a lot of Sean Baker movies have, where he's just done such a good job. And this applies to Mikey Madison as well, who I know did a terrific amount of preparation for the role, going to strip clubs, speaking to escorts, all of this kind of stuff to make the whole thing rounded. And as a result, you just get this, I think, this brilliant slice of life where you're afforded a peek, and I think it is often just a peek into all of these people's lives, all of these snapshots. But because it's such a vivid peek, you can fill in all of the blanks. So even though you have these kind of slightly blurred lines where you're not entirely sure what people's motivations are or necessarily how certain people are feeling in different scenes, you're sort of able to fill it in because the inner life feels so rich and so real. So I think it's really, really impressive. I have to say, I don't think that Mikey Madison is going to win Best Actress. But just to sort of touch on awards before we finish, I was very pleased to see, I think, Yura Borisov, a guy who plays Igor, has also been nominated for Best Supporting Actor, which now I've seen the film, I'm pleasantly surprised by, because, I mean, he gives an absolutely great performance, but it feels like a role that would often be overlooked. You know, he manages to make it sort of sweet and funny and endearing, while also being this sort of, you know, slightly stern, slightly scary, but maybe slightly tragic figure. So I have to say, delighted by that as well.
When I saw this name in the credits, I was like, oh, and I'm so glad it was. There's a lot of performances in this movie that are over the top in a great way. Like, not too much. Like, you can believe people are like that, but, you know, when people in real life get over the top, not, oh, that doesn't seem realistic. Very realistic shows of excess emotion, excess anger, excess frustration, excess ennui, you know, all these great things. It's so hilarious. The cavalcade of characters it brings together is very funny. But Igor as a character is so understated, but also the emotional through line. And it's such a nice thing to do, to make evil henchmen the emotional through line of the entire film. And so, yeah, I'd highly recommend this movie. I'm so glad it got a re-release, because people should check it out. It deserves it. I think it will make a good amount of money on this re-release. As I said, it was absolutely packed when I went to see it. It's definitely a great film. It's not a Bora, it's Anora. It's very fun, basically.
Well, that brings us to the end of another episode of Cinema Spotlight, and all that's left to do is decide what our films of the week are. So, Alex, you go first. Tell me, what's your favourite film of this week?
My favorite film of the week is I'm Still Here. I genuinely think it's my favorite film of the year. The film is absolutely gut-punching. It stayed with me days after I've seen it. I think it's beautiful to have an international film do so well. And Fernanda Torres is my muse, basically, after watching it. So I'll definitely go for that.
I think mine was absolutely Anora. I was so shocked how funny it was. I saw it last night. I had an absolute whale of a time. And I thought, you know, Mikey Madison, after hearing that she won the BAFTA, I'm very happy that she did. And I can't wait to see what she does, and I can't wait to see what next Sean Baker makes. And Reuben, what's yours of the week?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a really tricky one, because I really, really, really loved both I'm Still Here and Anora. I mean, it's a difficult choice. So I actually am going to say that The Monkey is my favourite film of the week, even though it's objectively not. It's a really fun, you know, splashy, horror-y time at the cinema. It will make you laugh, it will make you jump, and it will definitely make you go, oh, that's how long intestines are. So yes, go and see The Monkey if you're not feeling like watching a Best Picture nominee.
Thank you all again for tuning in to Cinema Spotlight, and thank you, Alex, for being an absolutely marvelous, wonderful, spectacular guest.
Thank you so much for having me, guys. I had a lovely time as always. It was brilliant. You guys are great.
You're also great, Alex. And next week, we're going to be talking about The Last Showgirl and an overall Oscars special.
We look forward to seeing you then. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.